Hey everybody, this is Tony, Taint the Lord A7, and I thought of a random fun video idea that I want to share with everybody. And that fun video idea is 11 metal albums that I would pick to get my kids into metal. Now, I'm not a dad, I'm not a father, I don't have any kids at all, but if I do have kids, I chose 11 metal albums that would help get my kids into metal. Now, a little disclaimer, all of these picks are really diverse, as in I want my kids to experience all kinds of genres in the metal realm. Not just death metal, but a little bit of thrash, a little bit of death metal, obviously, some straight up heavy metal, and maybe a bit of industrial metal. But either way, this is just going to be a diverse pick of metal albums that would hopefully help get my kids into metal. So yeah, 11 metal albums to get my kids into metal. So let's go straight to it. The first one is a classic from a classic band, and it would be Iron Maiden's Peace of Mind. Now, I don't think this album needs any introduction. Like, this album has been discussed and talked about a lot, but I feel if I want my kids to get into metal or get into Iron Maiden, Peace of Mind would be my choice because this is honestly my favorite Iron Maiden album. Just a lot of bangers on this album, a lot of classic songs, and yeah, just a really great straight up heavy metal album by Iron Maiden. And Peace of Mind is a classic album from them. Just a flawless album in my opinion, and my first pick to get my kids into metal. So that's Iron Maiden's Peace of Mind. Really good stuff. Next up is another classic band and a classic album, and that classic band and classic album is no one but Black Sabbath, Paranoid. Again, a classic album. Every metalhead knows this album. Actually, even if you're not a metalhead, everybody should know this album. This is just a classic. You can't go wrong with any classic Black Sabbath album, and Black Sabbath's Paranoid is just it's just an essential metal album that every metalhead should have in their collection, and definitely an album that will help get my kids into metal, hopefully. So yeah, Black Sabbath's Paranoid is just an essential heavy metal album that you can't argue is flawless. So Black Sabbath's Paranoid, excellent stuff. Okay, next up is a more extreme. Um, next up is a more extreme metal album, and that's Hate Eternal's Infernus. Now, if I want my kids to get into uh more death metal, I say you can't go wrong with Hate Eternal's Infernus. This is just one ferocious, aggressive, intense death metal album by Hate Eternal. In my opinion, this is just a really good death metal album that will help get my kids into the more extreme side of metal, and hopefully they will enjoy this absolute beast of an album. So that would be my third pick, Hate Eternal's Infernus. Just a really great death metal album to introduce to my kids if they want to get to something more extreme in the metal realm. Okay, next up is a different one, and for this one I could have chose any album, but if I want my kids to get into more gothic metal, gothic doom metal, I'll say the foreshadowings second ward is not a bad place to start if I want my kids to get into that more moody, atmospheric, gothic metal, doom metal vibe. And honestly, I could have chose so many more, but this is the album that first popped up in my head. So yeah, the Foreshadowings, Second Ward is just a solid gothic metal, borderline doom metal album that's very depressing, moody, and just feels like everything that's good in your life is slowly going down the drain. At least that's how I feel when I listen to this album. If my kids want to listen to some sad, dreary music in the gothic metal, doom metal realm, I'll say the Foreshadowing's Second Ward is not a bad place to start. So that's my fourth pick, the Foreshadowing's Second Ward. Okay, next, if my kids wants to get into some industrial metal, you can't go on with Fear Factory's Demanufacture. Yeah, this is pretty much the quintessential industrial metal album that every metalhead knows and enjoys, at least from the ones that I've seen. And it's just a essential 90s metal album in general. So yeah, this is like an industrial metal classic from the 90s that has some crushing riffs and some insane pummeling drummings and some absolutely wicked vocals from Burton C. Bell. And if I want to introduce my kids to more industrial metal, you can't go on with Fear Factory's Demanufacture. This album is just an absolute beast. So yeah, can't go on with Fear Factory's Demanufacture. Okay, next, if I want my kids to get into more progressive metal, I'll say I'll choose a more later album from a classic band, and that's Queensryche's Condition Human. Now, I could have chose the more classic albums like Operation Mindcrime, but I feel like Condition Human is a very underrated but satisfying release from Queensryche, and in my opinion, one of the better albums later in their career. And I feel like this album should have been the follow-up to 1994's the 1994 album, which I can't remember the name off the top of my head. I had it in my head, and oh wait, now I remember the 1994 album Promised Land. Yeah, this album should have been the follow-up to 1994's Promised Land. And to me, this is just a really solid progressive metal album with some very strong vocals, some strong songwriting, and it's just one of the better albums in the discography. This is just a solid progressive metal album with some heavy metal leanings here and there. And if I want my kids to be introduced to progressive metal, I'll say Queensryche's Condition Human is not a bad place to start. Of course, of course the classics are more essential, but this one is not a bad start, not a bad place to start. And this is just a solid album, in my opinion. So yeah, Queensryche's Condition Human would be the progressive metal album that I would introduce my kids to if they ever have the need to check that genre out. Okay, next up is some more death metal for my kids, and that's Cannibal Corpse, A Skeletal Domain, which to me I feel is a bit of an underrated album in the discography that doesn't get talked about enough. But if my kids want more death metal, you can't go wrong with Cannibal Corpse, A Skeletal Domain. Just a heavy riff driven extreme death metal album from Cannibal Corpse. And you cannot expect anything less from this band. So, yeah, some more death metal for my kids. Cannibal Corpse, A Skeletal Domain. Excellent album. And now for some classic thrash metal for my kids to enjoy and get into, and that's Slayer's Waiting Blood. Again, a classic thrash metal album from a classic thrash metal band. Slayer's Waiting Blood is just an undisputed thrash metal classic. It's fast, it's intense, it can get technical with the riffs and the solos, and this is just one insane release from Slayer. And yeah, Slayer Waiting Blood would be a good thrash metal album to introduce my kids to if they are interested in listening to some more intense thrash from the 80s. So yeah, Slayer's Waiting Blood. Next up, if my kids want to hear some more heavy metal mixed with power metal, you can't go wrong with Iced Earth's Iced Earth, Something Wicked This Way Comes. Just an excellent blend of heavy metal, power metal, with a tiny bit of thrash sprinkled into this album. It got riffs, leads, amazing vocals, a perfect album to introduce my kids to more heavy metal, power metal mixing sound, I guess. But yeah, Iced Earth, Something Wicked This Way Comes is just an excellent album to introduce my kids to that heavy metal, power metal sound. Really good stuff. Man, I really want my kids to get into more death metal. That's why I chose Deicide's self-titled album. Again, a classic death metal, a classic death metal release from Deicide. And again, if my kids want to listen to some more classic death metal, you can't go on with Deicide's self-titled album. It's fast, ferocious, insane, blasphemic, and it's just absolutely intense and in your face and heavy as hell. Like the riffs, the solos, the maniacal vocals. Yeah, my kids are going to get a hell of a ride with this album. And definitely another death metal release to introduce my kids to. So, yeah, Deicide's self titled album. And the next one is some Brazilian thrash by none other than Sepultura's Beneath the Remains. Again, if my kids want to listen to some classic Brazilian thrash from the early 90s, you can't go wrong with Sepultura's Beneath the Remains. Like the riffs, the solos, this is just some awesome thrash here and there and just everywhere on this album. And hopefully my kids can definitely get into more Brazilian thrash with Sepultura's Beneath the Remains. Just an excellent album from Sepultura. And that looks like that's 11 metal albums that I chose to get my kids into metal. Again, I like to keep it diverse, let my kids get into more different genres of metal, and hopefully my kids will be interested in listening to some metal with these releases that I picked. So yeah, hopefully everyone enjoys it. Hopefully someone finds this fun to watch, and let me know what you think. Until then, thanks for watching, and stay metal.